I gave her everything. £475,000 for a house that never existed, for a life I thought we'd build together. I was 70 years old, heartbroken, alone, and she knew exactly what to say. She showed me blueprints. She walked me through empty lots. She made me believe I was building a future. But there was no land, no construction, no dream. Just Xiomara and the fool I became when I stopped asking questions. I was sitting across from her in a small cafe in Davao, the kind of place where the coffee comes in chipped cups and the ceiling fans barely move the humid air. The blueprints were spread across the table between us, corners weighted down by our phones and her small leather notebook. She was tracing her finger along the lines, and I couldn't stop watching her hand move. "This is where the veranda will be," she said, tapping a spot on the paper. "Right here, Leopold. Imagine it. You'll wake up every morning and see the mountains. The light hits them just perfectly at sunrise." I leaned closer. The drawing was beautiful, detailed in a way that felt real. "And here," she continued, moving her finger to another section, "this is the garden. We can grow mangoes, papaya, maybe some herbs for cooking. You told me you always wanted to grow something, right?" I nodded. I had told her that. 3 months earlier, during one of our first conversations at a beach resort where I'd been staying, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do with the rest of my life. My wife of 45 years had left me 6 months before that. Not dramatically, not with screaming or affairs, just quietly, like I was a piece of furniture she'd grown tired of looking at. And Xiomara, she had listened, really listened. Not like my ex-wife, who'd stopped hearing me years ago. "The study will be here," Xiomara said, pointing to a corner room on the blueprint. "Windows on 2 sides. You'll have so much natural light. You can finally write those memoirs you talked about." I felt something catch in my throat. She remembered. She remembered everything I'd said. "It's perfect," I told her. And I meant it. She looked up at me then, her dark eyes soft and warm. "We're going to build something beautiful together, Leopold. Something that's ours. Ours." That word landed in my chest like a key turning in a lock. I'd been alone for so long, rattling around in my own head, wondering if anyone would ever want to build anything with me again. "How much?" I asked. "How much to make this real?" She hesitated, just for a moment. "Professional, careful. The land, the permits, the initial architectural work, it's going to be substantial. But Leopold, this isn't just an investment in property. This is an investment in us, in our future." "Give me a number," I said. She took a breath. "To start, we'll need to secure the land. That's £95,000. But that includes the legal fees, the surveyor, everything to make sure it's done right. I won't cut corners on this. I want it to be perfect for you. £95,000. I'd spent more than that on the extension to the house in Berlin that my ex-wife had wanted. The house I no longer lived in. The house that had never felt like mine anyway. "Okay," I said. Just like that. "Okay." Xiomara reached across the table and took my hand. Her skin was warm. "You won't regret this," she said. "I promise you, Leopold. This is going to change your life." I believed her. God help me. I believed every word. That night, I lay in my hotel room with my laptop open, staring at my online banking portal. The money was there. My pension, my savings, the settlement from the divorce. Numbers on a screen that represented 40 years of work as an engineer in Berlin, 40 years of bridges and buildings and projects that still stood, solid and real. I could do this. I could build one more thing. Something for me. I transferred £95,000 to the account number Xiomara had given me. When I told her it was done, she kissed my cheek and called me her partner. I didn't sleep that night. But it wasn't worry keeping me awake. It was excitement. 2 weeks later, Xiomara picked me up in a rented SUV. "Today's the day," she said, grinning as I climbed into the passenger seat. "You're going to see our land." Our land. I loved the sound of that. We drove for nearly 2 hours, leaving the crowded streets of Davao behind, winding up into the hills where the air got cooler and the views opened up. She was talking the whole way, pointing out landmarks, telling me about the area. "The soil here is incredible," she said. "Perfect drainage, stable foundation. And the neighbors? They're mostly expat retirees like you. Quiet, peaceful. You're going to love it." When we finally pulled off onto a dirt road and parked, I stepped out and just stood there. The view was stunning. Rolling green hills, the city visible in the distance, mountains on the horizon. "This is it," Xiomara said, coming to stand beside me. 5 acres. All ours. She walked me around the perimeter, pointing to invisible markers. "The foundation will go here," she said, gesturing to a flat area near the center. "And the driveway will curve in from the road, right through there. We'll plant trees along the side for privacy." I was nodding, following her, imagining it all taking shape. She pulled out a small notebook and started talking about technical details. Soil tests, water access, septic versus municipal connection, permits from the local barangay. She sounded like she knew exactly what she was doing, like this was as real as anything I'd ever built in Germany. "Can I see the deed?" I asked. It was an engineer's question. Verify everything. Double check. It's how I'd lived my whole professional life. Xiomara's smile didn't falter, but something flickered in her eyes. Just for a second. "It's being processed," she said. "The seller is actually a family friend. We're doing this on verbal agreement for now, which is very common here. But once the £95,000 clears, we'll have the official paperwork within 2 weeks. I promise." I should have pushed. I should have said, "No, let's wait. Let's see the deed first." But she put her hand on my arm, squeezed gently, and looked at me with those warm eyes. "Leopold," she said softly, "we're building this together. I wouldn't ask you to do this if it wasn't safe. You trust me, don't you?" I did. Or maybe I just wanted to. "Of course," I said. She smiled, relieved. "Good, because this is going to be incredible. Our dream home, everything we've talked about." That evening we sat on a blanket she'd brought, watching the sun set over the hills. She leaned against me, her head on my shoulder, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. "Thank you for believing in this," she whispered. "Thank you for believing in me." I kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for giving me something to believe in." When she dropped me off at my hotel that night, she kissed my cheek again and called me her partner. I went to bed thinking about the house, about the life we were going to build. I didn't think about the deed. I didn't think about verification. I just thought about her hand on my arm and the word ours. A month passed. Xiomara called me one morning, her voice bright with excitement. "I have something to show you," she said. "Can you meet me at the cafe? The same one as before?" When I arrived, she had a large tube of rolled-up papers on the table. "The architectural plans," she said, carefully unrolling them. "Customized, just for us." I stared. They were gorgeous. Detailed elevations, floor plans, cross-sections. Every room we'd talked about was there. The veranda with the mountain view, the garden laid out with pathways, the study with windows on 2 sides. "Xiomara," I breathed. "This is incredible." She was beaming. "I worked with a drafting team. Took me 3 weeks. But I wanted it to be perfect. Look, here's the kitchen. Open concept like you wanted. And here, the master bedroom. See how it connects to the veranda? You can have your coffee out there every morning." I couldn't stop looking. It felt real. More real than anything had felt in months. "How much did this cost?" I asked. Her smile dimmed slightly. "Leopold, I need to be honest with you about something. This level of customization, the drafting team, the connections I've made with the local government offices to expedite our permits, the coordination with structural engineers for the foundation assessments, it all adds up." "Tell me," I said. She took a breath. £120,000. But that includes everything. The engineering reports, the permit applications, all the revisions we might need. It's comprehensive." My stomach tightened. It was more than I'd expected. A lot more. But she was pulling out documents, showing me invoices, official-looking forms with government seals. I've also arranged a video call with the structural engineer. she said, checking her watch. He should be available in about 10 minutes. You can ask him anything you want. 10 minutes later, I was staring at my phone screen. A man in his 50s, wearing glasses, sitting in what looked like an office. "Mr. Hartman," he said in clear English, "I'm Engineer Reyes. I've been reviewing the site plans for your property." He started talking about load-bearing calculations, soil compression ratios, seismic considerations. Technical language I recognized from my own engineering background. He sounded confident, competent. "Any concerns?" I asked. "None," he said. "The site is excellent. Your architect has done solid preliminary work. Once we break ground, I'll be conducting regular inspections to ensure everything meets code." When the call ended, I looked at Xiomara. She was watching me carefully. "Feel better?" she asked. I should have, but something nagged at me. The engineer's office had looked sparse, empty, almost. And the invoices she'd shown me, none of them had company logos, just text, just numbers. "Leopold?" she said. I pushed the thought away. I was being paranoid. Old habits from a lifetime of German engineering precision. This was the Philippines. Things were done differently here. More informal, more personal. "I'll transfer the money tomorrow," I said. Her face lit up. She reached across the table and took both my hands in hers. "We're really doing this," she said. "We're building our dream." That night she came back to my hotel. We sat on the small balcony, looking out at the city lights, and she talked about paint colors, soft yellows for the kitchen, deep blues for the study, white everywhere else to keep it bright and cool. She was holding my hand, running her thumb across my knuckles, and I thought about how long it had been since anyone had touched me like this, like I mattered, like I was worth the effort. I transferred £120,000 the next morning. I was now over £215,000 into this dream, but when Xiomara called to confirm she'd received it, the joy in her voice made it feel worth it. "You won't regret this, Leopold," she said. I promise. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. 6 weeks later, Xiomara called me early in the morning. "It's happening," she said, breathless. "They're breaking ground today. You need to come see this." I threw on clothes and met her at the same spot where we'd picked up the SUV before. She was practically vibrating with excitement. In the car, she showed me photos on her phone. Workers in hard hats, an excavator parked on red dirt, wooden stakes with bright tape marking out sections of land. "This is from yesterday," she said, swiping through. "They've already started clearing and leveling. Today they begin the actual excavation for the foundation." I felt my heart racing. This was real. Actually real. "How much do we need for this phase?" I asked. She glanced at me, then back at the road. £85,000. That covers initial materials, the labor crew for the first month, and the equipment rental. It's a lot, I know. But Leopold, we're already so deep into this. The permits are approved. The plans are filed. If we stop now, we lose everything we've invested. I'd already put in over £200,000. Stopping now felt like admitting I'd made a mistake. And I couldn't admit that. Not to her. Not to myself. "I'll transfer it when we get back," I said. She reached over and squeezed my knee. "Thank you. Thank you for trusting me, for trusting us." When we arrived at the site, there were men there. 4 of them, standing around the excavator, smoking cigarettes. Xiomara parked and we got out. "Magandang umaga," she called to them. "Good morning." They nodded but didn't smile. I walked over, extended my hand to the closest one. "I'm Leopold," I said. "The owner." He shook my hand limply, said something in Tagalog I didn't understand, then went back to his cigarette. I looked at the excavation. It was shallow. Maybe a meter deep. Not nearly deep enough for a foundation of the size we'd planned. "Is this right?" I asked Xiomara quietly. "It seems shallow. They're still in the preliminary phase," she said quickly. "They need to verify the substrate before going deeper. It's standard procedure." I walked around the site. The wooden stakes were there, but they didn't seem to line up with the blueprint dimensions. The area looked smaller than 5 acres. narrower. I tried to picture the house we'd planned fitting here. It didn't quite work. Xiomara, I started. Can we talk about Leopold? You have to trust me, she said, and there was an edge in her voice I hadn't heard before. Sharp. Impatient. You're not a builder. I am. This is what I do. If you keep questioning every detail, we're never going to finish. I stopped, looked at her. She was staring at me, her jaw tight. Then, just as quickly, her face softened. She stepped closer, took my hands. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't mean to snap. I'm just under a lot of pressure, making sure everything's perfect for you, for us. I want this to be everything you've dreamed of. I felt ashamed. She was working so hard, and here I was, doubting her. I'm sorry, too, I said. I don't mean to be difficult. She smiled, kissed my cheek. You're not difficult. You're careful. And that's one of the things I love about you. Love. She'd never used that word before. It hit me like a wave. Let's get back, she said. I have some calls to make with the contractors. But you'll see, Leopold. In a few weeks, this is going to look completely different. When I transferred the £85,000 that afternoon, I tried not to think about the shallow excavation. Tried not to think about the workers who barely acknowledged me. Tried not to think about the fact that I was now over £300,000 into a project I couldn't verify. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and asked myself when I'd stopped being the kind of man who asked hard questions. I didn't have an answer. The calls started coming every week. Sometimes twice a week. Xiomara, her voice tense, apologetic, frustrated, always with a new problem. The soil isn't stable, she said during the first call. We need to bring in additional gravel for the foundation base. £30,000. I transferred it. The permits hit a snag, she said a week later. There's a new regulation about foreign ownership structures. We need to refile under a different classification. Legal fees are £50,000. I transferred it. The materials costs have gone up, she said, sounding exhausted. Lumber prices doubled in the last month. We're short £35,000. I transferred it. Every time, she had an explanation. Every time, it sounded reasonable. Every time, I told myself this was the last one. Then came the big one. She called me late at night, crying. Actually crying. Leopold, I don't know what to do, she sobbed. There's a problem with the land title, a legal issue. The seller's cousin is claiming he has rights to part of the property. Our lawyer says we need to settle it immediately or we could lose everything. My blood went cold. How much? £95,000, she whispered. I know it's a lot. I know we've already spent so much. But if we don't resolve this now, everything we've built, everything we've invested, it's all gone. I sat there in the dark, phone pressed to my ear, listening to her cry. My savings were draining. Every month, I was transferring money, tens of thousands of pounds, over and over, and I hadn't seen the house progress beyond those first shallow excavations. Can I see updated photos? I asked. Of the construction? There was a pause, a sniffle. Of course, she said. I'll send them tomorrow. But Leopold, I need an answer about the legal fees. The lawyer needs payment by Friday, or he walks away from the case. Send me the photos first, I said. Then we'll talk. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, I'll send them. The photos came the next morning. Blurry images taken from far away. The excavation site, but with more dirt moved around. Some wooden frames that might have been forms for concrete, or might have been anything. Everything was shot at odd angles, nothing clear, nothing that showed real progress. I zoomed in, trying to see details. The quality degraded into pixels. Can I visit the site again? I asked when I called her. I'd like to see it in person. It's not safe right now, she said quickly. They're doing heavy foundation work. Lots of machinery. The foreman said no visitors until they finish this phase. When will that be? 2 weeks. Maybe 3. But Leopold, what about the legal fees? I really need... I'll transfer it, I said, because what else could I say? That I didn't believe her? That I thought she might be lying? I couldn't say those things. If I said them out loud, I'd have to face what they meant. I transferred £95,000, then another £40,000 2 weeks later for what she called contractor disputes, then £75,000 for material shortages. I was over £400,000 deep. My retirement savings were nearly gone, and I still hadn't seen the house. One night, she came to my hotel with takeout food and a bottle of wine. We ate on the balcony, and she talked about the future, about the parties we'd host, about the garden she'd plant, about growing old together in our beautiful home. "I can't wait," she said, leaning her head on my shoulder. "I can't wait to wake up next to you in our bedroom, with the mountains outside the window." I wanted to believe her. I wanted it so badly it hurt. But somewhere deep in my chest, underneath all the hope and the desperate need to make this work, something was screaming. Something was telling me to stop, to ask the hard questions, to demand proof. I ignored it. I held her close and told her I couldn't wait either. And when she asked for another £45,000 the following week for what she called emergency structural reinforcements, I transferred that too. I didn't ask questions. I didn't demand to see the site. I just paid, because stopping meant admitting I'd been wrong, and I couldn't admit that. Not yet. I met Gerald at a bar in Davao called the EXPAT's Corner. He was an old friend from my first month in the Philippines, back when I was still just wandering around, trying to figure out what to do with myself. British, late 60s, retired banker. He'd been living in the Philippines for 5 years. "Leopold," he called when he saw me, waving me over to a corner table. "Long time, mate. How've you been?" I sat down, ordered a beer. We talked about nothing for a while. Weather, politics, the usual. Then he asked, "So what have you been up to? Still at that hotel?" "Actually," I said, and I could hear the pride creeping into my voice. "I'm building a house, out in the hills. Beautiful property, 5 acres. My partner and I, we're designing it together." Gerald's eyebrows went up. "Partner? You've been busy. That's fantastic, mate. Congratulations." I pulled out my phone, showed him the blueprints Xiomara had given me. His smile faded as he scrolled through the photos. "These are nice," he said slowly. "Really nice. You've seen the construction yourself, right? Walked the site? Met the contractors?" I hesitated, just for a second. "I've been to the site. They're in the foundation phase right now. Heavy equipment, not safe for visitors." Gerald looked at me. Really looked at me. "Leopold," he said, setting my phone down. "How much have you put into this?" "That's not really. How much?" His voice was firm. Not angry, concerned. I looked away. "Over £400,000. Jesus Christ." He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face. "Mate, please tell me you verified everything. The land deed, the permits, the contractor licenses. My partner is handling all of that. She's an architect. She knows what she's doing. Her name? Xiomara. Xiomara Santos." Gerald pulled out his phone, started typing. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Looking her up. If she's a licensed architect, she'll be registered with the Philippine Institute of Architects." He typed for another minute, scrolling, frowning. Then he looked up at me. "Mate," he said gently, "there's no Xiomara Santos registered as an architect in the Philippines. Not in Davao. Not anywhere." I felt cold. "Maybe she's licensed in another country. Maybe, Leopold." Gerald reached across the table, put his hand on my arm. "I've heard this story before. Foreigner meets local woman. She has a business opportunity, needs investment. There are always complications, always reasons to send more money. And in the end, there's no business, no property, just a very convincing story. Xiomara isn't like that," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. "I hope you're right," Gerald said. "I really do. But you need to verify everything, now, today. Get copies of the deed. Visit the site unannounced. Talk to the contractors directly. Do it before you send another penny." I nodded, finished my beer. We talked a little longer, but I wasn't really listening. When I left, Gerald grabbed my shoulder. "Be careful," he said. "Please." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Gerald had said. I got up, opened my laptop, searched for the land parcel number Xiomara had given me months ago. I found the government property database, typed in the number. No results. I tried different variations, different spellings. Nothing. I pulled out the business card for the structural engineer, dialed the number. It rang 3 times, then a recorded message. "This number is no longer in service." I tried again. Same message. Panic was creeping in now, cold and spreading through my chest. I went through my emails, found the invoices Xiomara had sent, searched for the company names online. None of them existed. No websites, no business registrations, nothing. I sat there in the dark, staring at my laptop screen, feeling the floor drop out from under me. But when Xiomara showed up the next morning with coffee and pastries, smiling, asking if I slept well, I said nothing. I smiled back, drank the coffee, let her kiss my cheek. Because if I confronted her, if I asked the questions, I'd have to hear the answers, and I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready to admit what I'd already started to know. So I stayed quiet, and I hated myself for it. 3 days later, I met a man named Carlos in the lobby of my hotel. I'd found him online, a private investigator. Discreet inquiries, the website had said. I told him everything, gave him copies of the documents, the parcel number, Xiomara's full name, photos of the site. "How long?" I asked. 3 days, he said. "Maybe 4. I'll call you." He called me on the 3rd day. "I can come to you," he said. "Or you can come to my office." "Your office," I said. I didn't want him in my hotel. Didn't want Xiomara to somehow see us. He handed me a folder across his desk. Plain manila. I opened it. The land parcel number I'd been given didn't exist in any government database. The property at the coordinates Xiomara had shown me was owned by a local farming cooperative. It had never been for sale. The architectural plans were templates, downloaded from an online marketplace for stock building designs. Someone had just changed the labels. The structural engineer, Reyes, didn't exist. No license, no business registration. The number I'd called had been a burner phone. The construction photos were from a real estate development in Cebu. Carlos had found the original images online. Same excavator, same angles, just different dates. Xiomara Santos wasn't a licensed architect. She'd been investigated twice before for similar schemes. Different names, same pattern. The investigator estimated I'd lost close to £475,000. Carlos pushed a piece of paper across his desk. Other victims, names, contact information. 4 of them, all foreign men, all retired, all scammed by Xiomara or her associates. "I'm sorry," Carlos said. I couldn't speak. I just sat there staring at the folder, at the proof of everything I'd refused to see. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I looked up. "What do you mean?" "Police. Legal action. There are options." I thought about it. I thought about standing in a police station, explaining how I'd given nearly £500,000 to a woman I barely knew, how I'd never verified a single document, how I'd ignored every red flag because I was lonely and desperate and stupid. "I need to think," I said. I called Xiomara from the parking lot. It went to voicemail. I called again, voicemail, voicemail, voicemail. I drove to her apartment. A small place in a neighborhood she'd said was temporary, just until the house was finished. I knocked. No answer. I knocked harder. Nothing. The landlord came out, an older Filipino woman, asked what I wanted. "Xiomara Santos." I said. "I'm looking for Xiomara." "She left," the woman said. 2 days ago. Paid through the month and left. Took everything." I pushed past her. The door was unlocked. Inside, the apartment was empty. Completely empty. No furniture, no clothes, no photos. Just bare walls and dusty floors. On the kitchen counter, a single piece of paper. folded once. I opened it. The handwriting was hers. I'm sorry it had to be this way. I stood there for a long time. Then my legs gave out. I sank to the floor. A 70-year-old man weeping in an empty apartment, holding blueprints for a house that never existed. The landlord called someone. I don't remember who. Someone helped me to my car. I drove back to my hotel. I don't remember the drive. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, holding the folder Carlos had given me. All the proof. All the lies. All the money. Gone. And the worst part, the part that was crushing me more than the financial loss, was knowing that I'd seen the signs. I'd known. Deep down, I'd known. But I'd been too lonely, too desperate, too afraid of being alone to admit it. I'd chosen the lie because the truth was unbearable, and now I had nothing. No house. No dream. No Xiomara. Just the echo of her voice in my head, calling me her partner, promising me a future, while she systematically took everything I had. I didn't go to the police. What would I say? That I gave nearly £500,000 to a woman I met 3 months ago? That I never checked a single document? That I ignored every warning sign because she made me feel less alone? They'd look at me like I was senile. Maybe I was. I went back to the cafe instead, the same one where she first showed me the blueprints. I ordered coffee and sat at the same table. The waitress didn't recognize me. Why would she? I was just another foreign man in Davao, alone, staring at nothing. I pulled out the blueprint from my jacket pocket. I'd kept it. I don't know why. The paper was worn now, soft from being folded and unfolded so many times. I spread it out on the table. The veranda, the garden, the study with windows on 2 sides. Our dream home, except it was never ours. It was never anything but a story. A beautiful, detailed, expensive story designed to extract money from a desperate man, and I'd bought it. I'd bought every word. The coffee came. I didn't drink it. I just sat there, thinking about every conversation, every moment, every red flag I'd ignored. The deed that was always being processed, the permits that never quite materialized, the contractors who wouldn't look me in the eye, the invoices with no company logos, the engineer whose office was empty, the photos that were always blurry, always distant, always wrong. I'd seen it all, and I'd said nothing, because admitting I'd been scammed meant admitting I'd been a fool. And admitting I'd been a fool meant admitting I was just a lonely old man who'd fallen for the first woman who paid attention to him after his wife left. I wasn't buying a house. I was buying the idea that someone wanted to build a life with me, that someone saw me as more than just a bank account, that I mattered. Xiomara had understood that. She'd understood exactly what I needed to hear, and she'd sold it to me piece by piece, £475,000 worth of hope and lies. The waitress came by. "Sir, are you okay?" I looked up. She was young, maybe 25, concerned. "I'm fine," I said, just remembering something. She nodded and walked away. I folded the blueprint back up, put it in my pocket, paid for the coffee I hadn't touched, and I left. Outside, the city was loud and bright and full of people going about their lives. None of them knew what had happened to me. None of them cared. I was just another foreigner, just another story. I walked back to my hotel, booked a flight to Germany, started packing. There was nothing left for me here. No house to build, no dream to chase, just the weight of my own stupidity and the empty space where my savings used to be. That night, I pulled out my phone, scrolled through the photos Xiomara had sent me over the months. Her smile, her hand on my arm, the two of us at the site, her pointing at the horizon, talking about our future. I deleted them. All of them. But I kept the blueprint because I needed to remember. I needed to remember what it cost to stop asking questions. What it cost to believe in something because I desperately wanted it to be true. £475,000. That's what it cost. And the house never existed. The flight back to Germany was long, 17 hours with a layover in Dubai. I slept through most of it. Not because I was tired, but because I didn't want to be awake. Didn't want to think. When I landed in Berlin, my daughter Anna was waiting at the airport. She'd asked to pick me up when I told her I was coming home. "Dad," she said, hugging me, "how was the Philippines?" "Peaceful," I lied. "Quiet, beautiful." She studied my face. "You look tired." "Just the flight," I said. We drove to her house. She and her husband lived in Charlottenburg, not far from where I used to live with her mother. They had a guest room. She'd offered to let me stay while I figured things out. Figured things out was code for found a new apartment, because the house I'd shared with my ex-wife had been sold months ago. The money from that sale had gone into my savings, the savings I'd given to Xiomara. We had dinner. Her husband Matthias asked about the trip. I gave vague answers. The food, the weather, the people. I didn't mention the house, didn't mention Xiomara, didn't mention anything real. Anna kept watching me, but she didn't push. My son called the next day, Thomas. He lived in Munich with his family. "How was Asia?" he asked. "Good," I said. "Different. You coming back to Berlin for good?" "For now." "Good. We'll visit soon. Kids want to see Opa." We talked for a few more minutes. Surface level. Safe. He didn't ask hard questions. I was grateful. I found a small apartment in Prenzlauer Berg 2 weeks later. 1 bedroom, top floor, no view. It was affordable, which mattered now because my savings were gone. I moved in with 2 suitcases and a box of old books. I tried to rebuild, financially, emotionally. I contacted old colleagues about consulting work. A few projects came through, small ones, enough to pay rent and buy food. But I was different now. I noticed it in meetings. I'd be sitting across from a client, listening to them describe a project, and I'd find myself doubting everything they said, looking for the lies, the gaps, the too good to be true promises. I couldn't trust anymore. Not them, not myself. I'd go to cafes sometimes, just to get out of the apartment. I'd sit with a book I wasn't reading and watch couples. Young ones, old ones, tourists, locals. And I'd wonder if they were real, if the affection was genuine or performed, if the man knew the woman was using him, if the woman knew the man would leave. I couldn't tell anymore. Everything looked like a performance. One evening, I pulled out my old engineering notebooks. 40 years of projects, bridges in Brandenburg, a hospital in Hamburg, residential complexes, schools, buildings that still stood, things I'd built that were real. I thought maybe I could consult again, stay busy, keep my mind occupied. But when I opened the first notebook, all I saw were blueprints, lines and measurements and specifications. Just like the ones Xiomara had shown me, I closed the notebook, put it back in the box. I couldn't look at it. I thought about Xiomara sometimes, late at night, when I couldn't sleep, not with rage, not even with real anger, just with a dull, persistent ache. She'd taken my money, yes. But what I'd given her, what I'd handed over willingly and desperately, was something deeper. I'd given her the last piece of myself that still believed in second chances. The part that thought maybe, just maybe, I could start over, be someone new, build something beautiful. She'd taken that, and I'd let her, because I'd been so afraid of being alone that I'd chosen a beautiful lie over an unbearable truth. And now, sitting in my small apartment in Berlin, surrounded by the pieces of a life I didn't recognize anymore, I realized I was more alone than I'd ever been, because I'd lost the ability to trust, and without that, what was left? I was 70 years old, divorced, broke, and utterly, completely alone. 4 months after I returned to Germany, I got a message on Facebook from someone I didn't know, a man named Peter Donnelly, British. The message was short. "Mr. Hartman, I hope this doesn't seem strange, but I found your name through a mutual contact in Davao. I'm trying to find information about a woman named Xiomara Santos. She claims to be an architect. I've invested in a property project with her. Do you know anything about her?" I stared at the screen for a long time. My hands were shaking. I could reply. I could tell him everything, every detail, every red flag, every pound I'd lost. I could warn him, save him, maybe, or maybe he'd already paid. Maybe the house he thought he was building didn't exist either. Maybe he was already too deep to pull out. Maybe he was sitting in a hotel in Davao right now, ignoring the same warning signs I'd ignored, telling himself the same lies I'd told myself. I closed the laptop. I didn't reply. What was the point? If he was asking, it was already too late. The money was already gone. The house was already a fantasy. And nothing I said would change that, because he wanted to believe, just like I had. And when you want to believe something badly enough, no amount of evidence will convince you otherwise. You have to learn the hard way. You have to lose everything. You have to sit in an empty apartment and realize you were the fool all along. I went for a walk instead, down to the Spree River, hands in my pockets. The air was cold. Berlin in November. Gray skies. Bare trees. I walked along the water, watching it move, thinking about the house I'd never build, the veranda, the garden, the study with windows on two sides. It was beautiful. Perfect, even. And maybe that's why I believed it. Because at 70, heartbroken and lost and desperate for something to hold on to, I needed something perfect. Something that made sense. Something that gave my life meaning again. Xiomara had given me that, and I'd paid for it. £475,000. Nearly everything I had, for a story, for a dream, for the idea that I could be someone other than the man my wife had left, that I could build something new and beautiful and lasting. But the house was never real. The dream was never real. The only thing that was real was my loneliness. And Xiomara had seen it. She'd known exactly what I needed, and she'd sold it to me, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. I stopped walking, stood by the water, looked down at my reflection, an old man, tired, broken, alone, but still here, still breathing, still standing. I thought about Peter Donnelly, about his message, about the hope in his question, the desperate belief that maybe, just maybe, Xiomara was real. I pulled out my phone, opened Facebook, stared at his message. I could reply. I could tell him. But what would I say? That he's being scammed? That the house doesn't exist? That Xiomara is a liar and he's a fool for believing her? He already knows. Deep down, he already knows. Just like I did. He's just not ready to admit it yet. I closed the app, put my phone away, started walking again. The house I dreamed of building was gone. The money was gone. Xiomara was gone. But I was still here, 70 years old, alone, broke, but still here. And maybe that was enough. Not happiness, not redemption, not even peace. Just the quiet, painful acceptance that I'd built a dream on nothing but hope and lies. And when it collapsed, when everything fell apart, I was the only one left standing in the rubble. I walked for another hour. Then I went home, made tea, sat by the window, watched the city lights come on as the sun set, and for the first time in months, I exhaled. The dream was gone. The house would never exist. But I was still here, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough.